your patience. I'd like, no. Okay. How's this? Okay. Thank you all for coming and for your patience. We're still figuring out the hybrid situation. So we're here today to, yes. Absolutely. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Well, there was a slight lag. Captions on, question mark? Okay. Okay. Thank you again for joining us today. So we're here in an effort to start up a community of practice around translation for accessible technology. And what I wanted to talk about first, that this is co-sponsored by CREATE and the Taskar Center for Accessible Technology. And we're so thankful for everybody that's joined us today and for creating the community that will support these kinds of activities. And we hope that you'll join us in future activities as well. The purpose of the community of practice and the thinking behind this particular panel is through the shared identification of a gap that we've seen both as researchers in accessible technology, as well as industry participants, as well as participants in communities that benefit from accessible technology and see the creation of technologies and the quick disappearance of some of these technologies as people are trying to translate them into real hands. And there are a number of different gaps that exist there, which we'll explore throughout the different panels and events that we'll hold. Today, we're focused on the story. What's the story arc of taking research products that come out of our labs, that come out of ideas, and how do you take those ideas and translate them into products in real hands? Joining us today are three amazing panelists that I'm so excited to have join us. I'm super excited to present each one of them, and they will tell us their story of taking an idea, making it come to life in practice, and sustaining it through the accessible technology arena and bringing it to real hands. So today joining us, and excuse me that I do need to use my notes for this, Brandon Biggs is the CEO of XR Navigation. This is a company building inclusive navigational solutions for indoor and outdoor environments. He is both an entrepreneur and researcher focused on creating solutions to some of the most difficult problems in the blindness field. So we can introduce Brandon. There he is. You're on camera if you want to wave. Thank you, Brandon. Next, and I'm going by alphabetical order, so no particular order. Next is Dr. Jonathan Duvall. He's a research biomedical engineer with the Department of Veterans Affairs. He is also the co-founder of PathVU, which evaluates and maps pedestrian pathways with regards to accessibility. And we can say hello to Jonathan.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. Lastly, but certainly not least, present in the room with us, Billy Price, as a teenager, was Seattle native and experienced a spinal cord injury, which caused paralysis from the chest down. And Billy lost the ability to move his fingers, and therefore daily tasks became quite difficult. But using creative mind and spirit, he did not give up. Born out of a need, Billy Footwear was founded on the principle of inclusion. Along with fellow co-founder Darren Donaldson, Billy strives to add value to the lives of others and make a measurable difference in the world, 1 foot at a time. And I do have to add a footnote to that 1 foot at a time, which is that I currently have 10 pairs of Billy footwear in my home, which I am super proud to say have allowed my adolescent daughter to transition well from childhood to adolescence, and she enjoys those footwear pieces every day. And so welcome to all 3 of you. Thank you so much for being here with us. What I'd like to start out with is allow each one of our panelists to present their story. And the request was essentially to ask what brought you to entrepreneurship in the accessible technology arena. I am hoping that they'll share whether they've had other kinds of entrepreneurial endeavors, whether successful or not, and what is the translation story of your product. Should we start with Billy? Is that all right?
Sure, I'd be honored to. So again, I'm Billy Price. I'm the co-founder of Billy Footwear, and I guess I'm also the CEO as well. So I'm a wheelchair user. That wasn't always the case. When I was a teenager here on campus, actually, I fell out of a 3-story window. I was a freshman. I had just been in school for about 2 weeks, and I fell out of my fraternity. And it was a head first fall to concrete, and it broke my neck, it broke my lower back. And in that moment, my world changed immediately. I spent the next 5.5 months at the University of Washington Medical Center, right? I'm staring at the building right out the window there, trying to figure out what life would look like moving forward as a wheelchair user. And that was a matter of trying to figure out the wheelchair to replace my legs, try to figure out how to write my name, brush my teeth, feed myself, and just basically move forward. So after I got out of the hospital, I actually went back to school, moved back into fraternity, and continued with my mechanical engineering degree, which I had about 2.5 weeks into it when I had my injury. Following college, I ended up getting a job with the mechanical engineering department of the Federal Aviation Administration, where I worked for 16 years and traveled the world, learned how to drive again, learned how to ski again. Really took the world back by storm. But there's one thing along the way that I never figured out how to do. I figured out how to dress myself, figured out how to put my shirts on, my pants on, but I couldn't do my shoes. And it really bugged me. So I ended up teaming with a longtime friend, had a really casual conversation, telling him about, because he was telling me about a shoe project he was working on. And in that moment, when he was telling me that, I threw an idea at him. And that was simply to have a shoe that had a zipper in it, which it went around the outside, around the toe, where the whole upper could fold over and you could drop your foot in unobstructed. Because what I'd recognize as being a wheelchair user and not having very good hand dexterity, what I found was every shoe on the market required you to shove your foot into it. And the solution was going to be either oversize your shoe or use some sort of substitute like Velcro to be able to, overcome the hand dexterity. But there were 2 problems I saw with that. One was it didn't look good. It didn't seem to have the fashion element. But secondly, you still had to shove your foot into a shoe. So I threw that idea at Darren. Darren made a prototype for me. And I put my shoes on again at the age of 36. I broke my neck at 18. I put my shoes on again at 36. So literally half a lifetime later, I was taking back that independence. And this small little idea all of a sudden turned into a brand where we want to take fashion, function, and smash it together and really be disruptive in the marketplace. Our shoe started off with 1, me being the individual. And just this past summer, we sold our 1,000,000th shoe. So we are in Nordstrom. We're in Nordstrom, we're in Zappos, we're in QVC. We sell domestic, we sell in Canada, we sell Europe, we sell in Australia. We're in Target now. We just launched with Kohl's and DSW. So we have done a tremendous amount, but we're still very much the tip of the iceberg. And it's so exciting to be on the bow wave of this inclusion movement.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Brandon, would you like to go next?
Sure. My name is Brandon Biggs, and I guess I got my start I got my bachelor's degree in music, and then I moved to get a master's degree in inclusive design, and now I am getting my PhD in human-centered computing. And back in 2015, I guess was my first introduction to entrepreneurship. I co-founded a business with my mom where we provided all the components of a visually impaired program to K-12 schools around the country. And while I was co-founding that and going through that process, I was bombarded just about every single day by problems faced by blind individuals as they're going through the school system around science, technology, geographic information, math classes, and all that. Those different subject areas just had loads of inaccessible materials that were used, and I thought to myself, it shouldn't be this way, that the world is so completely inaccessible for blind people going through school, when we've got solutions to a lot of these issues. So I went to my master's. I started my master's program and really began working on geographic access and inclusive maps for viewing maps there. And I started with a cross-sensory solution. So that's basically, can you view a map visually, auditorily, and tactilely, and get the same information in each modality? And so that was kind of my main focus. And while I was there, I started I performed several co-designs with different blind individuals, and we kind of worked on, what would be your ideal navigation solution. And it did turn out that people wanted a digital interactive map that kind of, updated as you moved around, and combine that with a highly accurate turn-by-turn navigation system. And so I've been trying to build that system ever since I did those co-designs. And currently, well, I guess while I was still there, building that cross-sensory map solution, I went to a conference and saw some technology from a place called the Smith-Catawba Eye Research Institute. And they had a tool there that you could label any 3D objects and put a digital label on them. And I said, I need that for my maps. And so for the next 6 months, I worked with them on this project, and they asked if I wanted to come join them at Smith-Catawba. And when I got there, continue working on mapping, but I saw these other technologies that were super amazing that I'd never experienced in the world before. And so I thought, that there needs to be some way of commercializing these. And we ended up getting several grants to continue our work on digital auditory maps, and in particular. And so I ended up starting a business for commercializing these maps in 2020. And it hasn't been something that we have done a lot at Smith-Catawba, translating the research to a product. So anyway, we basically I'm going through that process, and I started that process because I wanted blind people to have access to this really amazing tech that we were building that often gets a lot of funding and for research, but no funding for getting into the commercial marketplace. So I hope to be one of the first of many companies that does this through Smith-Catawba. So that's kind of a really broad overview of our translation process. So right now we're in the customer validation stage, and I'm searching for an accelerator over the next several years, over the next year or so to join, and we're slowly ramping up customers.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. We'll move on to Jonathan.
Hello. So yeah, my story is probably pretty similar to Billy's. I started out coming to school for mechanical engineering, and when I was a junior in college, I had a spinal cord injury while sled riding with some fraternity brothers, and had a C4 spinal cord injury, but they classify me as a C6. Anyway, so after the spinal cord injury and going through rehab, my doctor actually mentioned to me if I'd ever considered rehab engineering. And at that point, I'd never even heard of it or knew anything of what it was. You know, I was going to work on cars or something like that was my goal with going into mechanical engineering. But when I came back to school, I did a internship at the research lab that I work at now, the Human Engineering Research Laboratories at the University of Pittsburgh, and you know, really liked, you know, designing wheelchairs and assistive technology and things to help people with disabilities. So once I got my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, I finished that up, and then I went into grad school to work as a graduate student researcher, and got a master's degree and then a PhD in 2018, and now I've been working there as a principal investigator myself. The company that I started called PathVU, where we evaluate and map sidewalks and pedestrian pathways for accessibility, was based off of the research that I did while I was a master's student. We were looking at helping the Access Board develop guidelines for sidewalk roughness. So they had guidelines for like a cross slope and a running slope and changes in height from surface to surface. But they didn't have anything related to rough sidewalks for wheelchair users to get over. So we did a research study and, you know, developed kind of a test platform where we could vary the roughness of a surface and have wheelchair users drive over it and basically give us feedback on whether they found it acceptable and rate it. And we also collected vibrations from their wheelchair and compared those to the occupational hazard standards. And then we basically did a correlation of those two things with the roughness and found limits that we thought were good limits for how rough a sidewalk should be allowed to be. One of the problems was when we kind of quickly learned with developing that standard was there had to be a way to measure sidewalks to know if they, you know, how rough they were. So we developed a tool that you could push over a sidewalk and measure the roughness of it. But also, since we developed a tool that you had to drive over the sidewalk to measure the roughness, we also included the other accessibility guidelines, the slopes and the changes in height, and as well. So you could essentially evaluate the sidewalk for all of the accessibility features of it. And we kind of quickly learned too that one of the things that was needed along with that was to be able to kind of track the accessibility over time. So if a new surface was installed, then, you know, you could update that. And so we started mapping them as well. You know, if it was a sidewalk outside. You know, our primary goal was to be able to, you know, if a wheelchair user was traveling in a city that they didn't know, that we could tell them the most accessible route to get, you know, say from their hotel to wherever they were going, or even if an accessible route existed. So that's kind of where we ended up, and we're doing a lot of projects now. I think we have somewhere around 10,000 miles. No, yeah, something like that, that we've collected at various cities for different projects, and are kind of continually going after more projects and primarily helping cities right now with transition plans to make their sidewalks in their city more accessible.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. I think I'll ask Billy the next, Brandon, the next question, because he mentioned it, but it's actually going out to everybody. In your experience, what are some of the tensions and barriers to commercialization in this specific arena? So what's, you know, we know that there are barriers to young businesses in general, but specific to accessible technologies, what are some of the tensions and barriers that you experience as trying to start up a business?
Yeah, there's been several tensions and barriers that I've faced in particular with technology translation. I'd say probably one of the biggest is the need to bridge the gap between with expectations and ideas between bridging the research and the marketplace. So a lot of the researchers look at the marketplace and commercialization and say, oh, those are the business people, they're making buco bucks, and they're out there raking it in hand over fist. And the business people are looking at the researchers and saying, oh, these people are up in their ivory tower and don't know how to make products that sell. And neither really true. And so I really want to inspire a collaboration between these two areas and create like a pipeline between these research and commercialization, because especially in assistive technology, there's just not enough money in the space, either in the marketplace or in research, to waste any of it. And so if all this, like, for example, our company has received about $1.6 million in research funding to build this tool, which is incredible. But now we need to be able to give that to the blind people who need it to live their lives independently. So I think that's one of the major barriers, is just demystifying that process between research and commercialization, and kind of making them a more seamless process, because it is really, at the end of the day, what everybody wants is to make a difference in the world, and when they're in assistive technology, and that's how we can do it. And very few marketplace could also be like a nonprofit or a for-profit institution. It doesn't really need to be just for profit. And so that's also something to take note of. I would say another big issue is blind people or people with disabilities are often lacking they don't have the credentials. So like when I got to Smith Cutterwell, I wanted to be a principal investigator and go after grants, and I knew what I wanted to do. I had all the research done for the lit reviews, but I couldn't because I didn't have a PhD. And so I went to go start a PhD because they said, I'm doing the work, I might as well just get a PhD as part of that. And so there are very few like blind people with PhDs, and that's a huge problem. And a lot of blind people don't even know research exists. I'd say the third problem is that people think assistive technology doesn't make any money, and that's not true. It's really hard to make money, and you have to be creative. But I think there is ways to make a sustainable business, whether it's for profit or nonprofit. Sustainability is the important key there.
Absolutely. Thank you. Those are really good 3 points. I'm wondering if Jonathan wants to follow up on that.
Yeah, I kind of think what Brandon said is very true. There aren't enough people with disabilities that have any type of like STEM degrees or anything that actually do the research. And then part of that is because of what Brandon said, that STEM degrees aren't very accessible. We're actually working on a couple grants right now to try to make STEM laboratories and classes more accessible to people with disabilities as well. But I think the biggest challenge that I've had with translating any of the technology is really the finances. I think Brandon kind of mentioned at the end of, we'll invent something and say, hey, yeah, this will, help a lot of people. We've kind of validated it. Let's, get it out onto the market. And we'll do, some fundraising or some business model competitions and things to like talk to investors and angels and venture capitalists and stuff. And what we hear a lot of times is something like, yeah, I think that business could probably, survive and stuff, but we're looking to invest, tens of millions to make hundreds of millions. Or billions, and what you're looking for is an investment of some hundreds of thousands or a couple million to make tens of millions. And that's just not what venture capitalists are looking for. So finding the finding the right, investor to help bring it to market is a bit of a challenge. And then I think the other thing, related to financing too, is understanding the business model in terms of who's going to pay for it. Because a lot of what we develop are like new wheelchairs or things like that. And, they're going to be expensive enough that people aren't going to be able to pay out of pocket. So it's going to have to be like an insurance type thing. And that's, fine. We've done that with a few products and stuff. But if it's not something medically necessary, then you get into, all right, well, it has to be cheap enough for people to buy it themselves, or, where's the money going to come from? So that's one of the challenges as well, that, people with disabilities are higher unemployment rate, lower labor force participation rate, higher poverty levels, all those types of things. So if you're designing something for people with disabilities, especially if it's, not something that the general public uses as well, then you have to consider all of those things in terms of finances.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a really important point, which one of our follow-up sessions will focus on, which is what is the commercialization paths and how do policies impact what actually gets translated in the field? And specifically what you were mentioning is sort of how Medicaid ends up guiding what is accessible to people through insurance and what's not. And that ends up really impacting what technologies are made available to people at large. Thank you for that. Please, Billy, if you
So I think I kind of took this question in a little bit different direction. One of the big tensions and barriers that we face is I guess kind of the language that gets associated with our product. Because yes, the inspiration became from a functional need, like a medical need, but what we wanted to do is we wanted to bring something to market that had the fashion, the function, kind of dissolve these lines between adaptive and non-adaptive. So yes, our brand can very much satisfy the adaptive market, but we wanted to bring something to market that wasn't constrained by the adaptive market. So oftentimes when we're talking to a potential customer or talking to a business, when we present it, it may get seen as something that's quote adaptive or medical, but what we want to bring to highlight is our goal is to dissolve all those lines. It's not about like creating a silo that picks up an audience it's not necessarily represented. What we want to do is we want to just blow up the silos, like remove the barriers, create something that's more based in universal design that works for everyone. And it's a story that we've had to tell over and over and over. But I do think it's making tremendous traction. I think there's a lot of designs out there that incorporate universal design. It's very rooted in inclusion that everyone can be successful with. And to us as a brand, it really creates this equality and a level playing field that everyone can compete and participate. It also has been very helpful for us to be successful in the marketplace because it's a widget that does work for everyone. Now, granted, there's a lot of folks that get gravitated to the brand because of the functional nature of it. But for us to be able to survive as a business and to be able to do really big things and impact and make bigger impacts, we need to make sure that there's a marketing connection to a huge audience to be able to really help the individuals. Because if we would come out just an adaptive brand and to be like in medical, catalogs and stuff, we wouldn't survive. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be able to make the impact that we're making. We needed to cast our net as big as possible to get the financing, to get the eyeballs, to get the participation, to really help the unique and niche audiences. That was our approach.
Excellent. I appreciate taking that turn because it brings us to the last topic that we'll do a round robin, and I'll start with you, Jonathan. What, if any, advice would you give to young researchers as well as older researchers who are trying to take some of our research products and translate them into real hands?
I think the best advice I've gotten with any type of product or invention that I've been working on is what you hear a lot in any of the accelerators or business model competitions or things like that, which is fail fast. And that kind of comes up with a lot of making sure you really understand the need that you're trying to solve. And there's a story that I always remember from one of the workshops that I went through, that a guy was designing like an avatar for a tech company. I think it was like back when like the pictures first started for emails or something, but before you could upload your own picture, it was a like an avatar. And he said he was working on it for like 6 months for this company, and they were really pushing on him to launch it. And he kept saying like, oh, it's got a bunch of bugs, it's not ready to launch and stuff. And they said, well, we're going to launch it, we need to launch it and stuff. So he said he was just expecting like to be inundated with all kinds of complaints and everything about the bugs. And he said what they learned was only 2 people ever tried to download it. So he spent 6 months working on something that nobody wanted. That's one of the biggest things I've learned, is to, if you think you have a really good idea, just keep talking to people, talk to the potential users, talk to the people that might be paying for it if it's different, the people that would be distributing it, recommending it, all of those types of things, to really make sure that what you're designing, one, that there's a need for it, and also that there is some type of a business model that will be able to bring it to market.
Brandon, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree with talking to more people. In the startup world, we call this lean startup methodology, and the idea is that you talk to at least 100 different customers, potential users or customers of a product before you start really investing a lot of money and time into it. And I believe the same thing needs to happen in academia and before you even start doing a research project. So the traditional method of doing a lit review and getting research funding is you go through, you look at the literature, you find, maybe have an idea, and you go and see if somebody's already done that idea in the literature, and you find a gap where somebody hasn't done that research. And so then you say, I want to do this research, and that's how you get funding, basically. And I think there's a huge area that's missing there, and that's what do the users want? Even if you're building like a computer vision algorithm to help make wayfinding more accurate, you do need to talk about the problem area and how it relates to users in that lit review. So I think and what are the constraints you're working towards that the users really want? And you can do this through interviews and get IRB approved for something like this. And some people have said it's market research. It's research, and so you can generalize a lot of the findings that you're talking about here to other projects in this space. It's not just specific to your project. If there needs to be a better way of wayfinding technology, then that's applicable to many other projects, not just yours. So it is generalizable. It's not just specific, which is one element of typical academia. So you talk to as many people as you can. It doesn't need to be for an hour. It could be for 15 minutes to 30 minutes. Just get their feedback on what their problems are and what they would think should be the solution. And I really, really think that's super important. If you're a person with a disability, I think it's a different experience going through a lot of the academia process than it is with without a disability. And so I would recommend reaching out to people like you who have gone through the same process, or even people with a similar disability if you can't even find yours, who have gone through like the PhD process, for example. It really helps to have a community and a network to ask questions to. But yeah, I really wish places like NIDLR, National Institute on Disability, would have a lot more funding for these types of projects to bring them from academia to the marketplace, because they're just a fraction of what National Science Foundation, for example, has. So anyway, yeah, those are my recommendations for new investigators.
Thank you. I really appreciate that emphasis on planning way ahead, like doing the needs assessment even before you begin the research process. I think that's really important. Billy?
Well, I couldn't agree more of failing fast, and I couldn't agree more of mentorship. I mean, those are two amazing topics. But one thing I'd also add to that is much of this success of our brand, it's really been rooted in word of mouth and building relationships. And the relationships really comes from networking. Oftentimes we had so many conversations with so many people where the person we'd be talking to wouldn't be the immediate person that would help us, but they would introduce to somebody else, and that person introduced somebody else, and then on and on and on. And then that was finally the door opener. Building relationships, listening to customers, hearing what they have to say, incorporating their feedback. That's always been instrumental. One thing I will say is at the very beginning, when we first started this thing, we did a Kickstarter campaign, which is a crowdfunding means to get capital. And you know, through that chapter, I guess, in our story, it helped us tremendously, because one, it forced us, you can't just go live with something on a Kickstarter campaign and expect it to succeed. You need to do all of your research ahead of time, and then you need to have some sort of marketing campaign to drive eyeballs to that campaign in order to, you know, actually make money. So what we did was, originally we did a ski glove. We did an adaptive ski glove. And I put together a list of every single ski area in the entire United States, as well as Canada. So when we first went live with this thing, there was an email campaign going out to like 500 resorts. And each one of those resorts had a bunch of eyeballs. So that was one way to get a lot of attention for that particular project. And that ski glove project, we got some capital, which then put us in a position to continue with our shoe project. So that's kind of my, you know, background of being an entrepreneur, to like hack 2 Kickstarter campaigns that really set us up well for later in life. But the same goes true with both of them. You just got to do your research ahead of time. And because the research, one, it gives kind of a viable option for whether or not the right path, but also it's also your market. They're the ones that will be speaking out of a bullhorn to be able to promote your product, promote your idea, promote your movement. So I would really fall back on relationship, word of mouth, and then you know, don't be afraid to fail, because when you fail, oftentimes we failed so many times, but what we found was on each one of those failures, there was a big success to follow, and we wouldn't have found that success had we not failed in the first place. So just don't quit.
That's a great note to end on, and open it up for any audience questions. We have in the room, we have a microphone. And for those participants online, you're able to type in through the chat or raise your hand.
We answered all the questions.
Jen.
Thank you for this fascinating discussion. I have a question that's about, several of you are engaged in research as well as startups in various ways. And as a researcher myself, I have this, I struggle sometimes with the tension between trying to translate and doing the things that are traditionally recognized in the research process. And I guess I was just wondering if you had any insight or advice about how to balance between those two things, or maybe find ways to help them lift each other up rather than being in an antagonistic relationship in terms of time and available resources. Yeah, thank you.
I can actually speak to that a little bit. So my full-time job is a researcher with the VA, and a lot of times when I am, you know, applying for a grant or something to work on something, I'll talk a little bit about the technology transfer. And actually, when I applied for a training grant, career development award, as I first came out, one of the things I wanted to learn more about was technology transfer. And I got some feedback from the reviewers basically saying this isn't the job of a researcher. So what I found was actually in the VA, there were policies and some directives that basically said, as a researcher, you are also responsible for technology transfer, or to assist with technology transfer. And so I quoted the directive the next when I reapplied, and it seemed like that the reviewers accepted at that time, that technology transfer is a part of doing research. And so that's kind of the way I look at it. I mean, I know some universities might not look at it as much because they're just like publicized, publications. Luckily, where I work at, we still want to do publications and stuff, but we also look at licenses from the tech transfer office and patents, and things like that as well, to show our productivity, not just the number of publications.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's definitely a problem within academia that tech transfer is not one of the pillars that they do evaluation and evaluate tenure by, which is a huge problem. I definitely don't think that's a good thing. I think it's actually very harmful. So, but you can take a lot of the commercialization process and publish on it. And so, market research, for example, going back to that lean startup methodology, the very first part is interviewing 100 people who could potentially be customers, and you can write a really broad IRB and figure out how to do really short consent form, and just and use that as part of your process. And you don't need to publish on all the different stakeholders that you interview, and you don't need to get IRB for all those people, because if you're not publishing on it, you don't need IRB approval, so you don't need them to fill out consent forms. And so it is just a lot of talking to anybody you can meet with about this topic, and so that is those are two different options for getting publications out of this basic fundamental need for publications in academia. And you can also do field deployments, which is a part of human computer interaction, or any kind of going out into the field and having people interact with your tool or product or whatever. And even if you're selling that tool, or you're getting beta testers for it, that's all something you could publish on.
Lily, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I guess all I could really add was, the comment that, like, as an entrepreneur, it was a side hustle for sure. I mean, I couldn't just quit my job and then do this thing full time. It was a matter of an extra thing for it to all of a sudden become and grow to where it became a thing that I could step away from my day job and start doing responsibly. So I guess the way that translates when you start like studying and stuff, and then to be able to actually bring it to market, it can be a heavy lift. I mean, it doesn't take away the importance of that lift, but it can be a heavy lift. And I think that project just needs to kind of grow as a passion project until it becomes a main thing.
Or we can create mechanisms for support that can sustain that alongside the research process, which is a little bit of what we're trying to do. I would like, there's another question. So we are past the time. I do want to acknowledge that those of you who have to hop off, thank you so much for joining. And Dr. Ladner is going to ask a question.
Yeah, this is Richard Ladner. That was a great presentation. It's funny, what you guys are talking about is something I've been looking at with students, and we call it innovators with, disabilities. And looking back over that, I mean, some of the barriers that you mentioned are very important barriers, but there are other barriers as well. But there is kind of a plus side that sometimes these technologies become mainstream. And for example, those shoes are becoming mainstream because of the universal design. And we think about screen readers, 20 years ago, you had to spend $1,000 for a screen reader. And now they're built into iOS, they're built into Microsoft products and so on. Maybe they're not as good as JAWS, but they're pretty good. So this pathway into the mainstream seems to be something important for us. Maybe you could comment on that.
Yeah,
I mean,
actually,
you
I'm actually writing a paper right now, actually on that topic of inventors with disabilities and essentially assistive technology that became mainstream. And there's a lot of examples of closed captioning being used at bars because people can't hear the TV. All the curb cuts being used by people pushing strollers and things, not necessarily wheelchair users. There's a ton of examples, and I think I think it's kind of in some cases is a little bit hard to foresee that, but I think with doing enough market research and kind of thinking outside the box a little bit of what might be another use for this besides just the person with the disability is something that can really help, and that if you can find something like that, that really helps with translating it because you are opening up your market more, and the investors that are saying, well, if you're designing something for wheelchair users, that's 1% of the population. If you can say, yeah, it'll help wheelchair users, but everyone will use it, or something like that. That definitely helps the business case as well. But yeah, I think there's definitely something to that of there's a lot of things that were originally developed for people with disabilities that then start to be used mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, I mean, I'm sure in that room, you've got a lot of people wearing glasses, or you've got a lot of people who have texted, somebody today, or you've got people who have used a personal assistant or a Siri or something like that. All those have roots in people with disabilities creating solutions for themselves, and there's just, I think the technology needs to get to a point of where the usage is very stable, and then I think there's definitely a study of this life cycle that probably needs to happen for each of these different technologies about when did it go to mainstream. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's just so many of these examples, and we all want to go towards that eventually. And people want it to happen. And so when I tell people we're making non-visual maps, they say, "Oh, well, I'm always riding my bike, and I can't look down at the map to see where I'm going." It's not exactly our use case at the moment, but it could definitely be in the future.
So one thing I'm reminded of is early on, we were doing our ski gloves. So I was a downhill skier before I was in a wheelchair, and I still ski. And I wanted to go relearn how to ski. So I went to Winter Park, Colorado. And at that time, that was like the #1 place to go. At least that's what I was told. And because they created a business where they realized that it was a huge adaptive sit ski program, because they realized that a family that's going to come to Winter Park to learn how to ski in the sit program, they realized you're going as a family. So the program is built around the individual, but the resort is built around the whole family, because they realized, like, let's invest in this program, and this family will come for a week. They'll buy a cheeseburger each day. They'll stay in the lodges. They'll buy lift tickets. I mean, it makes good business sense. Well, we've experienced the same thing when it comes to our shoes coming to some of these retailers, because if they're looking at the shoe and they're seeing it as like the quote adaptive shoe, we'll say, well, that's not necessarily true, but let's look at it just through the adaptive lens. If this is sitting on your shelves, a family can come in. You can serve a group of which you've never really been able to serve before. And this family as a whole will be shopping in your store, of which they may have never been here before. So yes, you have a particular widget that may be working for the individual, but collectively, it makes good business sense because you can serve an audience you've never been able to potentially help. 100% like you did in the past. So that's kind of one strategy we're using, which really has done really, really well, helping us get into a lot of these marketplaces.
And for George Zatloka. So I believe there's an online participant. George, would you like to ask the question?
Hi, everybody. I'm George Zatloka, design research consultant. Thank you very much for your presentation. Amazing stories. And congratulations not to give up and follow your dream and end up with a product. I'm asking that, do you see the possibilities to having your experience, your going through the process, the whole thing, maybe put together some material, instruction, resource, a book or something to help other people with ideas follow your steps and having bring their ideas to life. I'm asking this because, you know, we just have discussed accessible technology, you know, designed for special circumstances, but without exception, it's widely used and benefits everybody else. So the process, and then one common thing in the process of accessible design is the empathy-driven approach and the contribution that everybody have emotionally involved. So for that reason, I'm thinking as all of the product in this environment would eventually serve the whole population, because we need IDs. We need IDs for the solutions widely in society. So I was thinking, going back to that if your experience would be available as a product, as a book, a project, or any way would be exposed to other people, maybe just like anything else which we create in accessible environment and eventually serve everybody, maybe this process, the business part, the creation part, would be just as accepted in a wider environment, not limited to accessible technology, just like other programs or other product. So I'm wondering that, do you came across anything maybe like a need for a collaboration, or do you see it's possible that maybe you would contribute with your experience to that program or that book or some way, using that that situation which happens every time accessible technology come across with wider population. Maybe this would be the solution that everybody who has IDs would be able to bring it to life. Do you? My question is, do you see the possibilities? Did you come across in some way discussions, or maybe bring together all of your ideas and create some really powerful project to help, again, the general population at the end? Thank you very much for your presentations.
Yeah, so there is I'm sure this is something that Anat's actually interested in as well, but there is a center called the Impact Center, and they focus on this technology transfer process and have a lot of stories of people doing impact technologies and assistive technologies, and they've got a podcast called Impact Tech, and so you can search for that on Apple Podcasts. There's also a knowledge case book for tech transfer, and I'll paste that link into the chat for my business in there. But they've got a bunch of other examples of companies that are doing this kind of knowledge transfer process. But yeah, I definitely agree there needs to be more, because it's still a niche area.
Does anyone else want to?
So one of these days I will write a book. I just haven't gotten on the horse quite yet, but I would love to contribute anything I can in the meantime.
Well, I think part of what we're hoping to generate this year through the community of practice is sort of best practices, a collection, a small collection. And of course, I'm not sure it will become a book, but we do want to expand the pipeline and the ideas that people have about the pipeline. As Brandon had mentioned and others too, there are certain stigmas about developing and creating in this area, and also about the sort of bridging the chasm between research and commercialization. And there are lots of stereotypes about what people's motivations are in working, particularly with groups with disabilities. And so I think it's really important to focus uniquely on this area, as opposed to just broadly offering ideas about how to bridge the gap between research and commercialization, but specifically for benefiting populations with disabilities. If I'm not hearing any more hands and Zoom chat requests. Awesome. Thank you so much. We're over time and I appreciate you all staying. It's been fantastic to host our amazing panelists, and I'd like for you guys to join in thanking everybody that joined us today. Brandon, Jonathan, and Billy, you've been amazing participants, and thank you so much for your time today. And we hope you'll join us next times as well. Your experience is invaluable to this group. Thank you.
Thank you.